Hi there, and welcome to Pasadena Symphony Conversations. I'm Brett Banducci, and perhaps you recognize me. I have been playing as a sub in the viola section of the Pasadena Symphony for, I'd say, over 10 years. And my colleagues and I, and everyone from the board, the staff, the crew, and especially the musicians, truly miss being able to perform for you during these tumultuous times. So we're going to be presenting a number of video podcasts, or vodcasts, over the coming weeks and months entitled Pasadena Symphony in Conversation. And what better guest to kick off our first episode than our very own music director, David Lockington. So David, tell me, where are you in the country right now?
I am in Grand Rapids. I've lived in Grand Rapids the last 20 years. I spend a lot of time traveling, and obviously I come to Pasadena regularly and love being in the community. We sold our house recently, and so we're actually in the house of my brother-in-law.
Your previous house was in Grand Rapids?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, that's right. So my brother-in-law is an incredible artist. I mean, we've got all sorts of things all over.
Oh, wow.
And he's not only an artist, but he's a writer and an improviser, a musician. He's just a fantastically creative guy. So we were 5 adults in this small house, and our granddaughter is also living with us. So
she must be loving this. Is she loving having everyone?
Oh my goodness, she is having the time of her life. Everybody's there with her. She's the most observed little person, probably.
And everyone's healthy and safe, and
yeah, thank you. We've all been healthy. I think people had whatever versions of the flu they had earlier on, and for some reason we were all just fine. And now the weather has been perking up. You know, we have these difficult winters here in Michigan, but the sun has been out, the warmth has come to the earth, and you know, one of the things that I love doing is running, and especially running barefoot on the grass. And so I feel like I'm back in my my element.
There's something to be said for the fact that as musicians, we're comfortable with isolation. That's how we got to where we're at. Yeah. We didn't do it, you know, on Facebook or running around. We got down to business in a room by ourselves.
That's right.
And I think because everyone I've talked to, it's been pretty much like okay, because they're home doing what they want to do, play their violin, you know.
Well, and one of the things that I've heard people talk about is this time is a fantastic opportunity to actually sort of realign with what you really want to be doing.
Thank you.
Well, we thank the universe for that.
Right. It's really a giant mirror, isn't it?
It is a mirror.
And for me, I just saw how much time I was wasting, just running around doing, what was I filling my time up with? It was really everything going against what I wanted to be doing. Right. Well, tell me this, what are some projects, with that in mind, what are some projects that you're gonna tackle?
Well, you know, as you know, I wrote this viola concerto a little while ago, and that took a lot of focus, a lot of concentration. It was during a pretty busy season. And since then, I've written one tiny little thing. You know, in the long run, at some point, I would like to write a choral piece. I'd like to write a big piece for chorus and orchestra. But I don't really know if that's my fuck. I mean, I love voice. That's sort of that's how everything in my musical world spins. It's very lyrical. So I could imagine writing a big thing, but in terms of the scale, I don't know if I have that kind of vision. You know, the viola concerto is about a half an hour long, and that's the longest piece I've written. Everything else has been somewhere between 5 minutes and 12 minutes, and mostly written for fun or for friends or special occasion. So I write as the sort of the need and the will and the muse takes me. A little bit different from you. I mean, you write because that's who you are, and you play the viola also because that's who you are, but what you do as a living as a viola player is probably more to support the deeper work of composing.
Right, exactly. Well, I feel like this would be a great time for you. I've heard your music and I always want to hear more of it. So large scale choral piece would be incredible.
I have no idea about the text. I haven't started anything.
Mhm.
But you know how it goes. You know, one little germ plants
One.
itself, one little seed, let's not say germ, one little seed plants itself, and then other things start to gather around it, and you suddenly find yourself in this sort of wonderful soup of intellect and emotion, and gradually things start to take shape out of this
Right.
amorphous form.
Right, exactly. And is this the process that you usually use as far as coming up?
Well, the way that I've described it the way I feel it is that I have an emotional vacuum that has to be filled with something, whether it's going to be poetry or music or even sort of going for a meditative run or something. You know, there's a need to express something through some form. And of course, I'm doing that all the time, conducting and taking on the emotion of composers and history and, you know, emotional archaeology. And as a composer, suddenly there's a moment where it's almost like everything falls away and I just go, and I find myself sort of plowing ahead. It might be an idea, it might be just a melody, or it may come as a form that then I flesh out. You know, it's going to be different in many different ways. It's like creating a program is different every time. It might start with a soloist, it might start with a symphony, it might start with a concept, and then you gradually refine it and work it through. So the same is true for composing for me. And what about you? Because you write in a very different style from the way that I write. I mean, you're emotional but very heady.
Well, I don't know if that's a good thing. I've been learning to balance that, because I think that the key to art is that you have all of this. It's head, heart, mind. Some people have too much head. Some people have too much heart. I know a lot of composers have too much heart. There's not really much there intellectually. So yeah, I noticed that about myself, that sometimes it can get way too heady. So lately what I've been doing is I put all the stuff in. Cut. Okay. I put all the stuff in my head and then I just let it go and I start writing. So that there's not there's not places where I would say this represents this, and I feel like that's where the heart kind of comes in. And then I was having, when you're writing.
Well, do you find a language for a piece? Or is it always your language? Is there something that's just absolutely Brett?
Me, yeah. Yeah, lately I've been kind of experimenting with different ways into the language, trying to create. So I created these tone clouds, which I think when we will do a podcast on my piece and I can explain all that. Because I was noticing I was getting, I think really creating is just about awareness of yourself. And the more aware you are and see what you're doing, I tell this to my students all the time, then you can start tweaking things and really making something that's going to have an effect on people. So I realized that I was getting really anxious about what note comes next. If you're writing in a kind of modern idiom, contemporary idiom, then the next note can be anything. So I felt a lot of creative anxiety. So that's when I developed this other system to have all the notes kind of planned out so that I would just pop around and find them. They were already there. And then suddenly the music just started flowing because I took that pressure off.
Right. Okay. So sometimes the structure itself is a defining principle that has its own life, its own direction.
Right. I think that's the paradox of art sometimes, is that you have to put in these constraints to get the art out, which is what I think, right? Which is what's amazing about where we're all forced to be in right now.
Right. Well, and there's something I always think about in relation to this, and that is, you know, we're missing a fantastic Russian program right now, but we're going to be doing it later on in next season, in January, I think. But Russian composers in the 20th century were forced to use very simple means and supposedly just simply to support the state's agenda. But in the process of using an orchestra with a very traditional size and structure and form, and even formal structures, they came up with completely new ways to look at, say, a symphony or the sound of an orchestra without avant-garde expressive kind of techniques, which I thought was fascinating.
Which ended up becoming so simple that it became avant-garde. It kind of came back around, right?
Yeah.
And they found a new way to attach that intent to sometimes just extremely simple means.
Yes, right.
Which would fool people that didn't know. This kind of comes back around what we were just talking about, that something had to be simple so that it could fool someone, but yet the composer knew what was attached to it, which was like a lightning bolt.
That's right. That's right. So what about the question of story in your own music? You know, you're writing a piece for us, and we're so thrilled that this is going to be played next year. It's called May. And Jim Thatcher, our principal horn, is going to be the soloist for this piece. And you already alluded to these tone clusters, these sound clouds. I'm not sure if that's the right word. But in what respect do those represent kind of an emotional journey that you could articulate, or maybe you wouldn't even want to articulate it?
Yeah, I don't know that I could. I just felt like I was kind of curating the notes as they fell onto the page, sculpting them, pulling back, listening to them, making sure that everything informs what's coming before, setting up the drama. But as far as a actual narrative, well, I guess there could be some, but they're, I don't know, not personal, but
yeah,
maybe they're not even relevant. Because in the end, it has to be music.
It does have to be music, doesn't it?
Well,
and that's right. The whole thing of, you know, what is abstract and what is programmed music. I mean, for example, I'm just going to turn on a little bit of a performance that we did at the beginning of this season. This is Brahms' First Symphony, and as all of our listeners know, we do 2 performances in one day. It's really a very challenging schedule. I mean, you can talk about that as a musician playing. It's very tough, isn't it? And what about a piece like Brahms' First Symphony? Is that exhausting physically and emotionally?
That one was. Do you know what wasn't? Was the Mahler First Symphony.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the Beethoven was like, some of the Beethoven 3.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought, I went home and just went to sleep. I don't think I even woke up till 3 o'clock the next day. But I thought it was so funny that the Mahler wasn't. It's almost like he crafted it. It was just so well balanced as far as what everyone was. Anyways, that could be a different podcast.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? Well, anyway, look, let's listen to a little bit. So we're talking about narrative. This, of course, is from the second D slow.
Sounds incredible.
Isn't that amazing?
Amazing.
You know, this is a great orchestra. The Pasadena Symphony is so much fun to work with. We've all worked with lots of different orchestras, but I just love the spirit of this orchestra. Everybody puts so much into it every time. We have very little rehearsal time.
Right. And the learning curve, I've always noticed, even when I'm sitting there, you know, maybe the first rehearsal is a little, but by the second one, it's there. So, well, tell me about your process of when you come to the orchestra. What's going through your head? How do you prepare these scores? Like, you're preparing obviously now for next season.
I have been conducting more and more from memory. It's not something that I don't have a photographic memory. I wasn't trained always to conduct from memory. And for many, many years, you know, traveling for half of the year, conducting something different every single week, I just personally didn't have the resources to do that. So I've been doing much more from memory. And of course, part of that is simply having done the repertoire multiple times now. I'm enjoying letting go of that sort of anchor. You know, we were talking earlier about musicians in this time of coronavirus. You know, we're pretty comfortable being by ourselves. We've trained ourselves to practice by ourselves and be very self-critical. And we also, in the process of practicing, get tied to the page. We're not great improvisers. And even as a conductor, I've been too tied to the page. So I decide, okay, am I going to do this from memory? Am I not? And I decide, and so that informs how I prepare. So on many levels, you know, of course, you deal with it structurally in the larger form. You break it down to smaller units, to orchestration, to phrase lengths. And then I start to dream it, and I'll just lie there. Say I wake up at 4 in the morning, as a lot of us do. I'll just lie there, and I'll just go through the piece. And if I can't remember a transition, you know, it's one way in the exposition, it's another way in the recapitulation, then I'll either get up right then and there if it's driving me bonkers, or I'll get up in the morning and I'll review it. And so I go through this process so that in the end, I'm not trying to remember anything.
Right.
It's just there. I've embraced it, I've embodied it. It's almost like I've composed it. And when we perform, I like the idea, although every detail of interpretation is worked out, I like the idea that it sounds like we're actually making it up as we perform. That's, I think, how it should be.
And then what's the difference that you've seen in yourself from performances where you're using the score and performances from memory? You have a different connection with the music?
Oh, the connection with the musicians, for me, you know, is totally different.
Night and day.
The podium is like a barrier. As soon as that barrier is not there, I can flow from one section to another as the music dictates. It might be, you know, following a melody, or it might be actually just conducting an accompaniment. I mean, there are a million different things we have to do conducting, but it's that sense of a sort of an organic unfolding that's so different, and looking people in the eyes, looking at a whole section, taking it all in, and taking this walk through majestic woods and being able to enjoy the flora and the fauna on the way. You know, it's an interesting thing. Mahler didn't agree with conducting everything from memory, because he said conductors usually get too fast because they want to get somewhere.
And the page is holding them back. The score holds them back.
That's right. So the score holds them back. And the other thing about conducting from memory is that if you've only memorized what you want to memorize, then there are other things you're missing. So it's quite important to memorize the score not only horizontally but vertically, so that you can be aware of something that's happening in a different performance, say, where you say, this interpretation seems to require a little bit more of that diminished chord from the violas and the seconds, you know, a little bit more piquant or something.
I see. So what would happen if the rehearsal was done from memory as well? Is that?
Well, I do try to do, I sort of test myself and see how how much I can remember on the, doing from the rehearsal. I mean, there are people like Mazel, and I'm sure Dudamel and Simon Rattle, all these people, they probably can do everything from memory. I mean, I've seen them do it. And so they know all the measure numbers and all the rest of it. I'm not that conductor. And I'm not sure that I'd even want to do that, because you do see things in the score. You suddenly see motivic connections, or you see a very detailed rhythm that you suddenly realize, oh, I'm not focusing enough, and I'm not hearing enough of that, and then you can deal with that in a rehearsal. I am visually oriented, so when I'm conducting in a rehearsal, I'm looking at the score and I'm just making mental notes. So if we say we go through the first 3 minutes, the exposition of something, I will always remember, 6 or 7 different things that I need to look at. And then I'll go back. But a part of the reinforcement is having seen it on the page. That's there, that's there, that's there. And then I remember it.
What about cello projects? So you're going to contemplate a composition project, and you've got next season to learn, prepare for conducting. But what about with the cello? Are you gonna...
Well, the cello is the cello is my truthinator. It keeps me honest when I recognize it more and more during these times, because I sometimes like to post a little cello thing, and if it doesn't sound right, it doesn't feel good. So it keeps me really honest. I have to really focus. Is the tone nice? Is it in tune? I love to play the cello. I love the physicality of making the sound. That's and when I compare how I play and how I conduct, I want to conduct more and more the way I play. And when you play, you can create, a glorious moment of something out of nothing. You can pull the time, you can change the tone, you can do so much when you're just by yourself or just with a small group of people or a piano. And with an orchestra, it's got to be very planned, but as I've got older, I want to have the kind of control over the ensemble where I can be free, get everybody's attention, and do something really unusual and sort of improvisational almost. But in terms of cello projects, I don't have anything right now. I mean, I think I've probably played my last concerto. I did this.
Yeah.
I did this piece by my friend Philip Sawyers a few years ago with Pasadena. It was great fun and took a lot of chutzpah, and I don't know I could do that again now. And Delana and I did the Brahms double a few times in the last few years, and that was a great pleasure. But, there's a lot of stress involved with that.
Right.
I don't know. Have you played a lot of solo stuff?
No, for that reason.
It is stressful, isn't it?
But, last year I decided I wanted to do a recital. Well, it wasn't last year, it was a couple years ago.
Yeah.
So I realized it just had to be on my own terms. So I commissioned students to write pieces for viola and organ. And I got a colleague of mine from USC. And I thought, I'm not going to do Brahms because that'll stress me out.
Yes.
And I wanted to do something that's kind of meaningful. And these kids needed premieres. So and then the two of us wrote pieces as well. So something like that, I wouldn't mind doing. But for some reason, I'm started practicing the first Brahms Sonata. I thought, well, no one's around.
It's so great, isn't it?
So
I did something similar to what you're describing 2 years in a row at Boston Court, where I did programs of just my music and had various people from the orchestra come in and play with me, and that was really gratifying. Of course, I kind of came unglued when I played Bach.
Isn't that funny? We should do a whole episode on just the weight and anxiety of the canon.
It's if you don't have that perfect memory, it is scary to play Bach. I did a competition once, and when I was at Yale, and my teacher was on the panel, and I was doing the prelude to the E flat suite of Bach, and I got lost. It's an arpeggiated movement. I got lost, and I started going around this circle of fifths, and I kept coming back to the same place. And I was knocked out of the competition, but my cello teacher said it was the most impressive improvisation he's ever heard.
Bach would have been appreciative too. That's amazing. Yeah, so I think we're in the same page with that. Just meaningful. If I'm going to put myself out there, it needs to be something meaningful.
Yeah.
And I don't feel that. Yeah, for me, playing Schubert, like there's other people to do that. And good luck to them.
I think that the pressures that everybody lives under, freelancing, where you have to drive so much, the hours are sometimes weird, your family is constantly being asked to compromise because your schedule is so bizarre. There's a lot of music to learn so quickly.
And then it's always looming. Are you ever going to be called back again? You don't even know that.
Right. That's right. It's very, very hard. And then at the center of it, you're playing stuff that pushes all your buttons.
Right.
You know, I mean, if you're still engaged as a musician,
right,
suddenly you're playing music that's opening you up to stuff that you felt when you were younger, or stuff that somehow is a part of today, but you don't really want to acknowledge it. I mean, it's a very confusing thing to be a performing musician.
Right. That's another silver lining for the situation we're in, which is that this has all been lifted.
Yeah.
Because there's nowhere to be, there's no rehearsal. Right. I've heard other colleagues talk about this too. They're just feeling really good because that's, one colleague was like, everyone's just been kind of like levelized now. There's no worry about who's doing this job and who got that job but didn't get this. It's just the playing field is level. And and then all the stress went away, and now we're all connecting. We would have all been too busy to do this.
That's right.
Right? But I think we're going to learn that we weren't. Or this is important. Well,
and I think that, not just as musicians, as humans, as you're talking about, we have to connect. But as musicians, I think there's a lot of value in diversifying. I mean, you're talking about music, you're writing music. People will do other things with music therapy, or going to play for people in homes. There are a million different things that we can do with our music that bind us to our community. One of the things I want to say to young people, and I'm sure it's being said through all these institutions, is that you are not just going to be a musician, you're going to be a member of a community.
Exactly.
And that's how you need to focus your energies and your creativity. Absolutely. One of the things that I've always fallen back on, but enjoyed expounding upon is my playing, my funny little pieces. I write funny little pieces that I've played for 30 years for kids and for any type of people, anywhere. I wrote them so I could play them at the drop of a hat. And those are some have been some of the most enjoyable experiences for me and for a lot of other people. And I think there are a lot of, the woman that played the Bruch violin concerto with us at the beginning of the season, she played these great encores that reflected her roots growing up. She sang and she fiddled, and I mean, it was so moving. And she even brought in a little glimmer of the Bruch last movement of the violin concerto in one of her improvs in the afternoon. It was just so refreshing. And that's what I think we can challenge ourselves with, to be more vital musicians.
Right. And this is really what you're talking about, is a return to creativity.
Yeah.
Not ego stuff about what is this, what style is this, creativity. I think that's what we all originally signed up for.
Yes.
And then, the paths start getting complicated. Great. All right. This is exciting. I'm really excited to do this with you and just see what happens and what we learn. And
well, I want to thank you, Brett, for stepping forward and offering your creativity and your time and energy in putting this together. I hope that our audiences of the Pasadena Symphony and way beyond are going to enjoy these casual conversations and get something out of it on many levels.
Absolutely. And maybe connect to the music and the musicians in a different way. I think that's the goal
Yeah,
here.
that's right.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. I'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Bye.